Okay, let's get started. You all are a very prompt and well-behaved audience. Thank you so much. My name is Mary Margaret Golton, and I'm with a firm called CDR here in Colorado. We are a small, very small nonprofit. We do facilitation and collaborative problem-solving kind of work, and we're specifically here to help BLM facilitate this meeting. I have a colleague, Leishan, who's here someplace, and there's my colleague in the back, Leishan, and there are 4 other people who work with CDR that you'll meet in a little bit, who will be facilitators of small group meetings. So that's what you'll be meeting in a second. So there are 6 people with more. There are BLM people here from Washington and from Phoenix. Jamie Anderson is someplace. He could raise his hand. There's Jamie in the back. Joe Stout is also in the back. And Shasta, who is the project manager whom we work with, and Leah, who works with Shasta. And then we have Megan, who is the planner in Colorado. And there are several other people who are working with our live stream audience who we'll meet from time to time. I would like to refer you all to the agenda and sort of tell you what's going to happen here. We will have a PowerPoint presentation, which Shasta will be doing, that will explain pretty much what Planning 2.0 is about. And it'll take maybe half an hour. We'll have about 30 pages of PowerPoint, and it is all summarized here in 3 pages. So you have this summary which you'll be referring to as we go along. Is there anybody that needs an agenda that didn't get one? Raise your hand if you need one, because we have some extras. Thanks, Leishan. Okay. Okay. So after the PowerPoint, we'll have about half an hour for you all for a Q&A time. And that's really a response to the PowerPoint. What questions you have, what you didn't understand, what you'd like them to elaborate on, what you heard. So that's really a clarification and a question and answer time. After that, we'll take a quick break, very quick, and we will go into 4 or 5 small groups. And at that point, you'll see on your agenda that there are a couple of questions that we want you to talk about. One of them is, do you have ideas on how BLM could achieve their goals in the best way? And the goals are on the top of this Planning 2.0, there you'll see 3 little checks. And the 3 little checks are to create a more dynamic and efficient planning process, about collaborative planning, how to enhance opportunities for everyone to be involved and to have input. And the 3rd is landscape, to plan across landscapes and at multiple scales. So that's one of the questions to answer in the small groups, and this is for your ideas. And then the second one about your ideas is what works from your standpoint. What kind of planning processes work? What kind of successes have you seen? What kind of thoughts would you like to offer them for successful planning? So we'll have about half an hour, 45 minutes to talk in the small groups. You will each have a facilitator from CDR, and if you need, you will have technical assistance from the BLM folks who are here who can come and sit down and answer questions of the more technical or political nature. After that, there will be a report back from each group. So there will be a person, the facilitator from each group, will let you all know, so there's nothing that's happened in the small group that you won't all hear about. By the way, there are cameras around here, and there is live feed. So there are some 40 people, I think, on the line who are also here. So, with the 50 or so in this room and the 40 or more, I mean, we've got about 100 people at this meeting, one way or another, which is a terrific turnout. So we'll be reporting back. The people who are facilitating the live stream will report back too. And then at the very end, we will do a summary. We'll talk about how you can keep up with what BLM is doing, what's happening next. We'll do a quick evaluation of the meeting, and we're done. We won't be here any later than 5. I mean, I doubt if we'll end before 5, but we could. 5 is when we intend to end. So does that make sense in terms of what you were expecting to be here for? Does anybody have any questions about the agenda itself? Okay. So if not, what I'm going to do is hand it over to BLM, and Jamie is the first person that's going to be speaking. And come on up.
Thank you all for being here today. Just an introduction of myself. I'm Jamie Anderson. I'm an advisor to the director at BLM headquarters in Washington, D.C. Thrilled to have you all here today. Just want to thank you so much for taking the time to come out and help us at this early stage in what we think is going to be a very exciting and very significant process for the Bureau. You all are here for the same reason that we all at the BLM are here, is because we care a lot about public lands, how they're used, how those uses are balanced, and how ultimately we work together to achieve our mission of multiple use and sustained yield. That together part, you see it in our slogan here, is really important and is the reason that we wanted to bring you all together today. Planning is really the way that we, is critical of the way that we go about our work, go about our mission. And doing that in the most collaborative way possible, with the most opportunity for public input, is really what we're interested in. And so, let's see, thank you all again for your time, and look forward to a good conversation. Thanks. I think next up is Joe Stout.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. My name's Joe Stout. It's good to see many familiar faces in here. And just again, like to thank y'all for coming out here. As Jamie said, this is important to us. We're excited. You guys, we're excited to have you in this room. We've been undertaking this planning effort the last 15 years, revising a lot of the plans. You guys have worked closely with us on a lot of this. And so we got a lot of brain power in this room today. And that's what we're really here to, get your ideas out on the table, share with us, like our facilitators are saying, what's worked, what hasn't. But also, this hasn't been just something that's, we're just in the beginning stages, but this is something that we have some initial ideas that we've put together, and that's what Shasta's going to be walking through today with you. And so, again, there's some conceptual ideas that we've come up with, and we're really looking for feedback on that as well as some of the other things. But this is important to us, and we really look forward to the outcomes here. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Shasta, and she's going to walk through the PowerPoint.
All right, well, get close to the mic. Thank you again. I want to reiterate what Jamie and Joe said. We're really pleased to have such a big turnout today and have all of you here to discuss and work with us to achieve the goals we have in this initiative. So we'll just dive right into it. I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but planning is truly foundational to the work that BLM does. Our resource management plans provide the blueprint for everything that happens on BLM lands, our day-to-day decisions, our activities, every decision that's made down the road. So this is a foundational and truly important process to consider. It's required under FLPMA, and as you all know, we do develop our plans through a collaborative process. We currently have about 50 resource management plans that are under development, and these are in, let's see, look at my slide, 6 to 10 planning areas for each state across the West. So we have quite a few plans. I believe it's somewhere over 150 plans in total in various stages of revision or years since they've been revised. So we're not really here to talk about that, though. We're here to talk about Planning 2.0. So I just want to give you a little bit of background about where this initiative came from. Like Joe said, even though we are in the early stages of the initiative, we have been thinking about it for some time. Back in 2011, the Bureau came out with its strategic plan called the Roadmap for Success. This strategic plan laid out a series of challenges that the BLM faces, and then also goals that we wanted to achieve in the next 5 years after the plan came out. One of the very important areas that was highlighted in the plan was improving our land use planning process. So it specifically called for developing a more proactive and a more nimble approach to planning. And I'll point out this website here. You can find the strategic plan on the web. It's publicly available if you want to go back and read it. So Planning 2.0 is really the application of what that goal set forth for us, trying to achieve that goal. Another thing that came out of this roadmap was that it called for a chartered team of BLM planners to come up with recommendations on how to achieve that goal. So since 2011, the BLM has been going through the process of trying to think through how we think we might achieve some of the goals of improving our planning process. This included an internal assessment. So that team went back and they looked at all the plans that had come out since 2000 when we began revising our land use plans. They looked at how long they're taking, how much they cost, the whole spectrum of assessing our plans and how the process is going. They also did a litigation review, so they went back and saw where we get challenged in our plans to understand where there's need for improvement. And then they developed a series of recommendations, and those recommendations are what led to the Planning 2.0 initiative. Simultaneously, the Bureau has been moving towards a landscape approach. We recognize that the public lands face complex challenges that are larger than just political boundaries of a single field office, whether these challenges be wildfire, invasive species, the need for energy development, and I could go on and on with the list, but all of these challenges that we're looking at, many of them cannot, I shouldn't say all, but many of them cannot be addressed just within the single boundaries of an RMP. So we've come up with a broad series of initiatives to try to figure out how do we manage public lands with this landscape approach. So this includes the landscape scale assessments. These are the rapid eco-regional assessments. I'm sure some of the people in the room or on the web have been involved in these, and many of these have come out just in the last year or so. It also includes the regional mitigation strategies that we're moving towards, monitoring for adaptive management and figuring out how we're going to apply adaptive management, geospatial data integration. I'll come back to geospatial data in a minute, but this is really crucial towards the landscape approach, because if you want to talk across political boundaries, you have to have the data that allows you to have that conversation. And then the science integration, applying the best available science to the decisions that we make. And so what I want to point out is that Planning 2.0 is really a part of this larger effort that we're doing in the Bureau to move towards a landscape approach. This is our opportunity to implement all of these other initiatives in our planning process. Mary Margaret touched upon these. These are our 3 project goals for Planning 2.0. So the first one, a more dynamic and efficient planning process. What we mean by this is we want to have a planning process that can respond to change, whether it be environmental change, social change, economic change. We need to be able to respond to when that change comes. And we want to be able to do so in a timely manner when it's still meaningful. The second one is we want to look for opportunities to improve the collaborative planning process. As I mentioned before, collaborative planning is foundational to our process currently, and we value all the input and the partnerships that come from this process to help us make better decisions. In Planning 2.0, we're looking for ways to make that even more effective, even more collaborative, and to engage our partners and the public at the time when it's going to be the most effective. And then the third one is this landscape approach. So planning across landscapes and at multiple scales. And what we really mean by this is we want to make decisions that are grounded in the broader context of what's happening, whether it be at one small scale for a resource, at a larger scale for a landscape, or even at the BLM scale. We want all of our decisions to be grounded in that larger context and aware of what's happening at the landscape. So, as I mentioned, there has been a lot of groundwork going into getting this initiative started, but we've just begun the process of the actual Planning 2.0 initiative. So we're at the very, very beginning, identifying potential changes. Today we're going to share some of our preliminary ideas with you about how we might do this, and we really want to get your feedback and your ideas in regards to that. The upcoming steps, we're looking at our rulemaking process. So we're going to go through and look back at our planning regulations and look for targeted changes to reach our goals within those planning regulations. We're also going to be revising our land use planning handbook. And so we've come up with a schedule where this will be a little bit offset. So we expect that we'll come out with our proposed rule sometime in the spring. And I would add that there will be a formal public comment period when that rule comes out. We'll probably develop our draft handbook just after that and hope to release it sometime around summer 2015. The final rule we'd hope to get done sometime around spring 2016. And then the final handbook sometime around summer 2016. And I just want to apologize, in your handout, this says 2015. It's supposed to say 2016. So we realize that those aren't the same date. So I'm just going to walk through a few of our ideas on how we might achieve some of these goals. So the first goal, creating a more dynamic and efficient planning process. First is figuring out how we can integrate adaptive management into our plans. Adaptive management is something that we've been talking about, the broader environmental community has been talking about, and beyond for a long time. I think most people agree that it's a good idea, but as of yet, we haven't been able to effectively do this in our plans on a broad scale. And so we're looking for ways that we can do adaptive management in our planning process. There's a few examples where they're starting to do this. The solar programmatic EIS, if anyone is involved in that in California, beyond California, has looked up front to try to come up with some planning decisions that actually allowed for a bit of range so they could adapt without having to trigger a plan amendment. The sage grouse plan amendments are also doing this, where they're trying to figure out how can we put some adaptive management into our process up front so that we then don't have to go through another amendment process when there is some change within those boundaries. We'd like to apply this a little bit broader to all of our plans. The second way that we're looking to create a more efficient planning process is having earlier public and stakeholder collaboration. We believe that getting that input from our partners, from the public and the stakeholders as early as possible ultimately is going to make the process not only better, but more efficient in the end, because we'll get all that information early on rather than having it come when it's a little bit later and a little more work has gone into it. And then finally, we're looking to improve the amendment process. Our hope is that if we can more effectively do adaptive management, that maybe there would be fewer amendments, but there's always going to be circumstances that trigger amendments, unforeseen circumstances that come up, new conditions, whatever they may be. And when they do come up, we want to be able to respond to them in a timely way. And this is an area where I think we're really open to your ideas, because it is a challenging thing to figure out how well we improve that. I should say we're open to your ideas in all the areas. That's one where we would encourage you to really help us. So the second goal, enhanced opportunities for collaborative planning. I'm going to go into a little more detail later in the presentation on what we mean by this, but one is that we're just looking for new opportunities to involve the public. A lot of different plans have already been doing this, bringing the public in new and innovative ways. We want to apply that more broadly across the Bureau. Improving our use of web technology. An example of this is currently we only accept protests in a hard copy. You have to actually mail it to our P.O. box. We'd like to be able to accept them digitally as well, and I think that would be easier for anyone who's filing a protest as well. Web-based mapping, very, very important. The solar programmatic that I mentioned earlier, they have an application called Solar Mapper that's already doing this. It's been very successful. I think that this is an important direction to move towards with all of our plans. And then finally, this is more of a recognition, is that we want to continue to actively engage cooperating agencies. The local partnerships are really important for these plans, and so engaging them up front and throughout the process, as we already do, is going to continue through Planning 2.0. And then the third goal, planning across landscapes and at multiple scales. We're reconsidering boundaries for future plans. So what we do not mean by this is we are not going to throw out all the plans that we've been working to revise. If it just came out in the last year, it still is going to live its life, and we want to honor that. But when a plan does need to be revised, we'd like to have guidelines and have thought through considering new planning area boundaries. What would be a more appropriate boundary to address the resource needs, the local economic needs, whatever it may be? How do we develop those boundaries? The second one, higher level plans focused on landscape goals and land use allocations. There's a few components to this. One is just as we get broader with our plans, if we're going towards this landscape approach, it's important to pull out some of the detail that we've been adding into the plans, because as most of you probably know, these plans are getting bigger and denser and harder to get through and just laden with details. So an example of this is we're considering not doing travel management planning, for example, in our planning process, and then tiering that to our plan. So the point isn't that we're not going to do that detailed planning, it's just that maybe this is not the appropriate scale to do it at. The other thing is that we're moving towards, or we would like to move towards, more of a landscape approach to looking at the goals of our RMP. I'll talk in a moment a little more about what that means, but basically trying to look at the priorities for the landscape. So examples would be, where are our priority areas for habitat in this landscape? Where are our priority areas for conservation? Where are our priority areas for energy development? Doing that in a broader look and at the same time so that we can be more thoughtful across our landscape about how we're thinking about the direction. And then the third, the emphasis on geospatial data-driven plans. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but again, if we want to talk at a broader landscape, if we want to be able to communicate across boundaries, whether they be BLM boundaries or even communicate with our other agency partners, we have to have the data to support it. So what could this process look like? This schematic is also in your handout, but this is basically a conceptual framework for how we make planning decisions that we've been playing around with and trying to think through this process. So on the left, you have our more classic or traditional approach to how we've done goals, objectives, and allowable uses in RMPs. Typically, these are driven, or structured, I should say, program by program by program. Each program has its goals that then tier down to the objectives and the allowable uses. The issue with this is that, one, there's a lot of redundancy, and I think this leads to those very big plans. You might just have goals that are repeated program by program. But two, the program goals might not be consistent with each other, and that can be a problem. So the direction that conceptually that we'd like to go with this is more towards these landscape goals. So these would be goals that we're looking at across a landscape. Really, what are the priority areas? What's important in the landscape? What's our vision for the landscape? And where are these priority areas? And then have integrated objectives for those landscape goals. We're still gonna have land use allocations, we're still gonna make those decisions, but those would all be feeding back to these landscape level goals or priorities that we set. So I want to talk a little bit, that was our decision framework that we've been thinking about. I want to talk a little bit more about just the process that we go through in planning. This is our current planning process. So on the left-hand side, we have the development of the RMP. The red squares, are opportunities for public involvement. So we start with our notice of intent. We go out to public scoping. We do our assessment of the management situation, or we analyze the management situation. We develop alternatives. We prepare our draft plan, and then we go out for public comment. And so that's the first opportunity the public gets to see what's in that plan. We have our public comment period, we revise it, and then we go into protest and our governor's consistency review. So what we've been talking about is developing a stronger emphasis on pre-planning. So the steps that we would take before we would actually start the process of planning. So first we would be evaluating the existing management and really looking into, what do we need to accomplish with this plan? Do we need to throw out the whole plan and start from scratch? Is some of the management working? A more focused plan, so to speak. We've then been talking about going out for some sort of pre-planning outreach. As we're envisioning it, this would be going out to the public. It could be stakeholder workshops. I don't know, there's a lot of ways you could structure it. But basically, this is when we'd set the landscape priorities, the landscape goals. So it would be both what's important, what's our vision, where is this important, and doing that through a collaborative process. And then moving into our assessment, so the data gathering, both BLM data from monitoring that's been happening, but also going out to our partners and the public, trying to involve these diverse data sets that we might be able to get from either local government, organizations, citizen science, looking for the best available data to inform our plans. We already do an assessment, but currently we do it after scoping right here. So the idea is that if we moved it before scoping, rather than going to scoping with this blank slate like we currently do, where we say we're going to revise a plan, provide planning issues, we would have this baseline data that we've gone through the process of assessing, and we would have this vision for what our landscape goals and our direction, and then we'd move into scoping. So it would be a more informed scoping process. It would be also an opportunity to look back at that data for the public to see the data and see what's missing, what's wrong, to provide input. The third thing that is a little new that we're thinking about is then going out for some sort of outreach after we develop our alternatives, but before we before we release our draft plan. So like I mentioned earlier, right now it goes straight from scoping from the public perspective to the release of the draft plan, but there's no real view of what's happening in between that. With this idea, there would be some sort of interim outreach. Here's what we're thinking we're going with the alternatives, getting feedback on that. There are a lot of examples of where this is already happening. I know the Western Oregon is an example of where they did this. So it's not necessarily something that's never been done by the BLM, but it's something that hasn't been applied broadly across the agency. So just to dig into those things I just mentioned a little more, the first step where we evaluate existing management, this would be internal to BLM, but some of the questions we'd be looking at, is existing management working? Are there resource management concerns? What is the anticipated scope of the planning effort? And what is the planning area boundary that might be useful to address this scope? So really thinking about where that boundary is going to be. The collaborative pre-planning outreach, some of the really important questions. What resources and multiple uses are important in the planning area? Where are they important? What is our long-term vision for the landscape? Is the planning area boundary and scope of the planning effort appropriate to reach this vision? And what data is available for this planning effort? And then the data gathering. So this would be that assessment process before scoping, would include things such as a recent plan evaluation, the RIAs that have come out and are continuing to come out, data that we get from cooperators, monitoring data, and other data sources as available. And then finally, the alternatives outreach. Questions that would be relevant here. Is the range of alternatives complete, or is anything missing? Is any relevant information missing? And are the goals consistent with each other? And so I'm talking about those landscape goals from that earlier diagram. So this is my final slide. Just to summarize the presentation, how is this approach different? First is this emphasis on collaborative pre-planning that we don't do currently, and also this new idea of alternatives outreach, so going out to the public sometime between scoping and when we release our draft plan. The second is more focused plans, so because we just develop that shared vision, the landscape goals, the landscape direction, having our plans actually be more focused rather than looking at, we're revising a plan and just throwing everything out and starting from scratch. But what do we actually want to focus on? The landscape level goals and the integrated resource and use objectives. This is a new framework of a way of structuring our plans that we're thinking about. the less prescriptive plan. So getting that detail out. Again, I want to reiterate that we'd still be doing that detailed planning. We just might not be doing it in the resource management planning process. And then finally, really thinking about adaptive management and thinking about it up front during our planning process. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Margaret, and I think we'll be taking questions. And I don't know if Joe and Jamie want to join me up here to help answer the questions. No, I think Joe has it. We do for the live stream.
So, yes, first of all, we do need a mic for the live stream, and there are extra ones here, and a couple of our people are going to be handing them around. So if you have a question, you need to use the mic, and you'll notice that it has to sit on your chin. If you hold it down here, it doesn't help very much. So it needs to be close to you. The other thing is that there are two different kinds of comment we're getting here. One of them is now, and that is clarification about this that you've just heard, and questions that you might have about what are they talking about, what does this mean, what's different. And the second is ideas you have, and that's going to happen in the small groups and then back. So hold your big ideas, but let's right now have from all of you what questions you might have for BLM. Do you guys want to get these? About what you just heard. We'll have some questions from our audience on the air too, but let's start with our audience in the room. Yes. Mike, to you.
One question I had
You want
was...
to say who you are first?
Yeah, I'm Nick Payne with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. One thing I was thinking about with the landscape level planning is, how jurisdictional boundaries will be dealt with, say, between states and RMPs.
Great, thanks. So would one of you like to handle that?
Yeah, a good example how we're seeing that now is with our sage-grouse effort, where we're planning, across the broad swath of states, and there's multiple jurisdictional boundaries. And so we're seeing greater collaboration across states internally within the Bureau and even with our state and other partners as far as sitting down, really taking that, broad look and seeing how it relates across the political boundaries, because with sage-grouse, it does not matter. And so we don't see necessarily changing, this effort's not going to change our boundaries that our field offices have, but we're looking at different boundaries for the planning efforts. And so, we're envisioning, there could be plans where you're planning across state boundaries, and you're going to have to be working with those cooperators and partners on each side of the state. So.
Thanks. And let me say that we are making notes of this, but in no time during this meeting will you be quoted. So don't worry that we're going to say, he asked the following question. But we are going to be taking notes so that we know and that we can write a report about what kind of questions were asked. Yes.
Hi, I'm Claire Mosley with Public Lands Advocacy, and I have a question about the scale of what you're proposing to do. In order for you to do a more landscape scale approach, then it seems to me that you would have to make fewer decisions to go into that plan. I know that regional plans have been tried in the past and they took forever to get done. So can you explain to me a little bit exactly what kinds of decisions you're planning on making in these new landscape plans? How program decisions will fit into that, and are there things that you're considering not including?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now we have roughly over 160 resource management plans in the Bureau, and clearly moving forward we've realized that's not attainable to continue at that scale. And so what these additional boundaries will look like, that's one of the questions we posed up there, where we're considering different boundaries and trying to determine, it's going to be at multiple scales, so it's not going to be the same everywhere. In states like Alaska, where you're talking huge acreage, a district plan is a landscape plan. Whereas you come in the lower 48, it could look different. So we're really kind of throwing around ideas on what that could look like, and building a process that would help us go bigger if we want to go bigger, and plan at different scales and give us more of that flexibility and kind of encourage folks to go that way. And getting to the second part of the question on the program decisions. So we envision sitting down with a lot of the programs and looking at the decisions that they're currently making in the plans. A lot of the allocations aren't going to, our plan is not to remove those from the plans. What we're looking at pulling out is a lot of the prescriptive nature that will tell you, how you're going to get this, decision done, who you're going to work with to get this decision done. And we've added a lot of implementation, what we call implementation or activity level plans. A great example is the travel management planning that some of our RMPs have taken into, pulled into the larger RMP process, where we're going route by route, designating thousands of miles of routes across the field office unit. So clearly, if we're looking at a broader scale, like say, in a district where we're looking at a plan, we're not going to be able to meaningfully work with who we need to on the ground to get that work done. So a lot of the larger program allocation decisions, we're not looking on stripping those out because they're important and they need to be made in the plans, but it's some of that more detailed, kind of more, implementation level that we're definitely going to looking at discouraging and pulling those out.
So, for instance, a right-of-way?
So she asked, for instance, a right-of-way.
Yeah, we're definitely our right-of-way avoidance and exclusion area decisions we make in our plans. We envision that staying. Again, we haven't sat down with all the programs to actually talk through this, but I mean that's a key decision that needs to be made at this scale, and so we don't envision it. That's something that will not still be made in the planning process. But again, transmission corridors. How do we effectively address transmission corridors in the planning process? And there's I know there's some different ideas out there. So that's kind of what we're looking to you guys to. I mean, you guys have been doing this with us, and we're open to some of the ideas. But the programs, we will be going through that process, sitting down with them in the future here.
You're next.
Barbara Vasquez with the Northwest Colorado RAC. I just have an operational question for the BLM. This is planning revision done in Washington. What's being done to get buy-in on the local levels so that there's more pull rather than push to actually implement whatever this wonderful Planning 2.0 becomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Internally, a lot of these ideas came from our field. The assessment that Shasta talked about earlier, that was done with field planners, field managers, other resource specialists. Clearly within the agency, folks realize we can't keep going down the path we have been going. And as a RAC member, you start at one of these, and the RACs have been critical partners in our planning efforts. And you start, and maybe 8 years later, a plan comes the other end. I mean, that's not really a lot of the partners that you start with aren't there at the end to help you implement. And so we really see a benefit of trying to gain some of these efficiencies with where we're trying to go, so that there is that not only meaningful engagement, but efficiency, so we can move through these processes, bring new information in, and utilize members like the RACs in this process, so we get sound decisions. So go ahead.
We didn't go into the structure of how we internally are doing this project, but we have put together a team that's focusing on the handbook revision and a team that's focusing on the regulations. And the teams are made up of field office staff, state office staff. So actually the majority of the people that are working on this project are from throughout the BLM. Our land use planning handbook team lead is up in Alaska. So we spend a lot of time trying to coordinate time zone changes, but we are involving a diverse group of people from BLM in the process.
So we have you, and then in the back next.
Hi, Joel Webster with TRCP. I have a question that I guess goes back to this landscape scale. And if you go to the second page of the handout, when you talk about the current RMP structure and then the integrated RMP landscape approach, the goals and objectives are set at that landscape level, and then it's kicked down to what it looks like individual RMPs. Are you envisioning that the landscape goals and objectives are developed through a separate plan, and then you have these individual RMPs, or would that all be integrated where you have one giant plan, and then you do those, whatever, in this case, these 3 RMPs separately? I'm just trying to figure out how you envision this. Would it be like a systematic sort of, we do all these landscape things, and then as appropriate we do individual RMPs under those, or would it all be done in sort of a systematic process.
Yeah, so I hope we're not making giant plans out of this, but these would be decisions that we'd work at that pre-planning stage collaboratively with the public. We're calling them right now landscape goals, but it could be, landscape priorities, landscape direction, where we sit down with our partners and look across the landscape and figure out, where are the priorities in which areas and where is it important, almost a zoning more, where we actually try to focus in across that landscape. And those are what then, comes into the document and helps drive some of the step-down objectives, integrative objectives, and program decisions. And so it's that upfront look that we'd sit down with collaborators and draft some of those decisions and bring that in at the beginning. So it would be part of the plan.
And then, would there be like several individual plans created from that, or be one?
It'd be one, is
Okay.
what we're envisioning, yeah. So,
Okay.
and again, it'd be for that appropriate landscape that, we'd determine.
My name is Chuck McAfee. I'm a farmer from Montezuma County. Early on, you said, I believe, that you look at the plans and that are in place and try to determine whether or not they're working. So my question to you is, given that there are a heck of a lot of variables that are probably varying, how do you approach that, and how do you make determination of what's working and what isn't, and how do you approach making changes?
Just to clarify, I think what I meant was what was working with the planning process and not necessarily the implementation of the plan. So each of those plans does go through an evaluation process, but that wasn't part of our internal assessment. That was more looking at developing plans.
Yeah, we do have a formal evaluation process that we go through, and we look at the decisions that are on the ground and, just look at the demands. Has some of the demands changed, and is there new information that we need to bring in, new science that's telling us something different, that our goals, our direction, our objectives aren't, helping us achieve, we're not able to achieve those anymore based on these new demands. So that's a kind of separate process. So thanks for that clarification.
Okay, right back here. Suzanne O'Neill, Colorado Wildlife Federation. So with respect to new RMPs that will be beginning and master leasing plans, how do you anticipate incorporating this pre-planning set of tools into processes that are beginning right now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We do, as you saw, have 50 some odd plans going now, along with some master leasing plans that have started. And master leasing plans are kind of that blend of, kind of project level decisions with land use plan decisions. And we envision those processes going on, just like the revisions that are in process going on. This is looking towards the future. And so we're not going to slow down, any of what's already been started and moving forward. This is going to be a couple-year process to get there. So it's looking forward. And master leasing plans, we look at as a valuable tool for us to get that kind of more detailed plans. And so we'll definitely be looking at how to integrate master leasing plans into this new framework as we move forward, and interested in your thoughts on that.
But are you saying for a notice of intent, which is supposed to come out, say, very shortly for a new RMP and MLP, that you won't begin experimenting with the pre-planning tool yet? You'll wait? Just clarifying.
Yeah, no, we're definitely looking, and there's field offices already that are looking to, bring some of this stuff online with what they're doing already. And so I think probably the one you're referring to is here in Colorado. Were you thinking the Royal Gorge field office? Yeah. Yeah, we're in discussions on how best to, as that moves forward, how best to, how 2.0 would integrate with that, how they can bring some of these ideas into their process. Outside of that RMP revision, we're really not going to be beginning any new RMPs in FY15. We're going to try to do some of this pre-work that's identified here and kind of experiment with that in some other states. And 16 would be the year with, ideally when this is finalized, we'd, embark on revisions with this new framework in mind. So, but Royal Gorge is one of those ones that's kind of in its own place. So, yeah, transition, good word.
Okay, who's the next person? There's three back here. Did you raise your hand? Yeah, good. Stand up. That's great.
Yes, my name is Robin Knox. I'm with the Western Native Trout Initiative, and I'd like to express a word of caution on the language that you use when you talk about landscape and when you talk about resource management plans. If the goal is to create a landscape approach, I think it'll be very important in these listening sessions and in your upfront work to get a good definition of what you mean by landscape. Because if the goal is to look at natural resource use, which may include grazing, oil and gas development, whatever use, when you talk about the landscape, you have to take into account amongst Western states that each individual state has their approach to managing the lands and waters under their jurisdiction and the animals under their jurisdiction. So if on page 1 you talk about landscape includes conservation and resource use, on page 3 when you go into your possible revised process, there's no word or there's no use of the word landscape in that. So I think for involving the general public and various associated organizations who want to comment on this whole process, you need to be very clear up front how you define landscape as well as how you define resource. Because the resource management plan, you have 168 of those that are generally centered out of a specific location. So that's my comment.
That's a great point. The word landscape is tricky, and we talk about it a lot, what it means, how we use it in relation to all of our plans, NEPA documents, et cetera. The answer that we've come up with, which is probably unsatisfying to just about everybody, is that it depends. It depends on the resource you're looking at or the use that you're looking to manage. If you're talking about a species, then it's likely its range or its wintering habitat, or if you're looking at oil and gas development, it can be a basin or a specific shale play. If you're looking at how you actually make this stuff happen on the ground, interacting with states, then obviously you have some geopolitical landscapes in there as well. And so we dance around the word consciously because we know that there is no easy answer. Part of what we mean when we use that term, though, is that you consider these different scales, that you don't limit your analysis to just the four corners of where you've drawn your line. And so, we've talked some here about where do you draw that line? How big is it? How small is it? What decisions get made where? A big piece of that is that ideally you should be able to construct a planning framework where the line isn't so important anymore, where you have a shared set of data, shared set of tools, unified goals that can bridge across divides, such as that. So again, something we work on a lot, and we certainly appreciate hearing from that.
On the possible revised process that you shared with us on page 3, I noticed that you're planning on doing a lot of outreach to the public prior to issuing a notice of intent. How do you plan to ensure that that's an open and transparent process if it's occurring prior to you putting something in the Federal Register? How do you make sure all stakeholders have a seat at the table? Because it sounds like you're really developing some goals at that point, but it still seems like somewhat of an informal process. And also, how do you avoid some pre-decisional issues at that point before you've even told the public very specifically that you're engaging them in this process?
No, it's a great question. Yeah, it is on there. Okay. Yeah, as you can see, these are conceptual as far as what we're thinking. We haven't necessarily worked out all the details, and we're interested in some of your thoughts. I mean, the Federal Register notice process, everyone's familiar with it. It's pretty standard, and that's we might not see that as the best way to outreach to partners. I mean, there's lots of other ways you can do that. So we're, as Shasta was saying earlier, we're increasing our, increasing our ways in which we reach out to folks outside of that process. And so we'd be open to suggestions on that you might have. And as far as describing that phase and what would happen in that phase, we are looking to sit down with folks ahead of time. And it's, how it's been described, we've been looking at trying to establish some landscape priorities, landscape direction at that stage that would then help move into the process. But it wouldn't be, pre-decisional in the sense that, that's where we're locked in, what we're making. We're trying to, take a bigger look, bring more folks in at the beginning and help guide where we're going. And so we don't look at it as something that would, be pre-decisional in nature. It'd be just more collaborative and informing, once we do begin the process formally. So.
Okay, in the very back row. Hi, I'm Vanessa Mazal with National Parks Conservation Association. We're super enthusiastic about the idea of broader and better collaboration early on, but it does occur to me that you run into a little bit of a question about at what scale are you starting to define cooperating agencies and stakeholders. I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit. Currently, under the current process, so much happens at the local level, and as a result, a lot of it is very inconsistently implemented, or it depends on kind of localized relationships with cooperating agencies. I'm just wondering if you can give us a little bit more detail about how you're thinking about who to bring into the fold. And also I wanted to make a suggestion, which is that I think it would be really valuable, even if in a fictional scenario, you could map this out as sort of like a, so that people could get a better sort of visual sense of how these different layers of planning might integrate. It might be a good idea just to include more of a visual of this, not necessarily the process, but how it would ultimately look kind of on a map.
Oh, great. Thanks for that suggestion. Yeah, the cooperating agency process, I mean, we feel like that's been foundational for us as far as involving in local, counties, involving our state partners, et cetera. And so obviously we've had broad planning efforts where that boundary has been pretty big, and we have broad cooperating agencies, whether it's, multiple states, tons of counties signed on, other federal partners, like the Park Service and Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, et cetera. And so we don't necessarily see drawing the boundaries at different scales limiting that process. It might expand who can, has a seat at the table, but we really value that process, and we plan to continue to look for, additional ways to kind of enhance that as well.
So we're going to let our friends on the air report in next. So Leah, it's your turn.
Thank you. So Carolyn has written in and is wondering, speaking of cooperators, if when we're talking about improved access to data to use in planning, if that just includes cooperating agencies or if that can be citizen science groups, et cetera. So could you clarify that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we, as we move, into the 21st century, there's so much data out there. We realize that we don't necessarily have the best data internally, and there's lots of folks out there collecting data that we could use to help inform our planning process. And so when, how we envision that or thinking about that right now is we're really looking for opportunities to, broaden that net as far as if, there's stuff out there, we want to know about it. We have our own, requirements for, as far as the Data Quality Act and what we can and can't use to, in making some decisions on. But there's lots of great data out there, and meeting with some of the partners through the summer as part of the outreach. I mean, that's what we heard loud and clear. Hey, we're collecting a lot of this data. We really like to share it with you. If there's a way, we can do that. And so that's one of the things we're going to explore as far as how we go about that as we move forward. So it would be more than just, cooperating agencies and some of our partners.
And Leah, you had a comment from your people on the air too that you wanted to share.
Just some technical difficulties. If you're having a hard time finding the handouts, you can click in the upper right-hand corner of the website. And if you still have a hard time, send an email and we'll get you there.
So click on you people in the air, click on the upper right-hand corner of your website to get the handouts. Okay. All right. there was someone right here. You had a comment. Who? There was someone next. Okay, back here, and then you'll be next. Okay. Okay, you're number 3 here. 3. Okay. Yeah, you're next.
Scott Jones, Trail Preservation Alliance. I had a question. I've heard a lot of we're going to plan at the landscape level, we're going to plan at the field office level, and then we're going to do a lot of local planning. I guess my question is kind of a twofold question. Number one, how are we going to fund all of this? Because the only thing we ever hear from the local field offices is they have no money. So for starters, that's I think an important question. And then it's been our experience that every time we introduce a new level of planning or new layer of planning, that a lot of resources get directed towards coordinating the regional or whatever you want to call it, the landscape plan, with the local plan. And I think our experiences with sage grouse planning and the resource plans from the Kremling Field Office and that kind of thing provide a very good example of my concern. The sage grouse plans regionally are talking about surface disturbance levels, that kind of a thing. Yet nobody at the field office can tell us what areas are and are not in compliance with the proposed landscape standards.
Okay, who would like to do that? You, Joe?
No, that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons why these plans have become so big, because that more activity level, what we call, or implementation level planning, wasn't getting funded by the programs, that would benefit from it. So they followed the money, to the RMP process, and so a lot of the decisions were moved into the resource management plans. And so that's something that's definitely on the table as we look to move to this approach, and internally as far as how we can maybe shift our resources so that that layer of planning gets attention that it hasn't before, and kind of look at some way to, kind of redistribute or focus to that level. Because like Shasta and Jamie were saying, that planning still needs to get done, some of that prescriptive planning, and we want to put more of a focus on some of that. And we see this is a perfect opportunity to do that through this effort, because we're going to be coming up with some clear kind of delineations at the different levels. And we almost don't look at this as another layer we're putting on. It's just more smarter planning and looking beyond our current boundaries and kind of taking in what we need to from these larger landscapes. It just makes sense, and we can't do this stuff in isolation. But it's a great question, and it's something we're definitely going to put a lot of attention on as we move forward.
Question number 2 person, yes.
Hi, Megan Cram with the Nature Conservancy. Just wondering if this process is solely focusing on those items that you guys laid out, or is this really blowing open the whole planning handbook, and you're going to be looking across everything in that planning handbook?
Yeah, the regulations, as Shasta during her presentation talked a little bit about that, is more targeted. This isn't, a Forest Service new planning rule. We are definitely talking actively with the Forest Service throughout this process, and they've been, sharing some of their ideas and what they've learned, and we're looking for ways where we can maybe match up a little better too with what they're doing. So, it makes sense to the public. You're not getting 2 stories on, how you go about, planning on Forest Service and BLM lands. So we're definitely looking, working with them, but it's not a blow everything open. As far as the handbook goes, there's clearly a lot of areas that we're looking at to make improvements in that as part of this effort. Obviously, a lot of what decisions are in a plan versus not. We're definitely going to be working with the programs to try to get a better handle, more clear handle on what is in and what is not, so that it's clear to the public as well. And other things like adaptive management, which you heard, developing formal guidance. And we see there's lots of opportunities to do that, and a lot of that will happen in our handbook as well. So, but it's not a, blow everything open sort of thing. So.
Thanks, Joe. You're next here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Harrison Topp. I'm with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. I'm curious, the idea of adaptive management, which seems really great, also seems to sort of butt heads pretty clearly with many projects on BLM land that have long-term implications. So I guess I'd ask for you to speak a little bit to how you sort of balance these long-term projects that would be hard to adapt to after they've already been implemented, and also speak a little bit to, and I think the gentleman in the back spoke to it earlier, if there is need to do retroactive action on something that maybe was not considered fully using the landscape approach in the first place, how that could happen.
Yeah, again, maybe your second question first. We are looking forward, with this, and so we're trying not to, clearly once these plans are in place down the road using this new process, they're, we're, like Shasta said, the plans that are on there are going to stay. They'll be evaluated whether we need to kind of bring in a new planning effort just like they would before, but it would be with this new approach. So we don't see much with the retroactive outside of the process we typically go through. But the adaptive management one is tricky, and it's one we've been wrestling with. And there's folks in the room here that have a lot of experience with adaptive management and have a lot of great ideas. But it is tough, especially in the land use planning sense. And we've been, especially with the sage-grouse effort, we're definitely trying to see what we can do with that. The Forest Service has adaptive management language in their NEPA regs, and so we've been talking with them on how they are envisioning implementing and planning as well, implementing it in their planning process. We're also exploring it pretty rigorously with the sage-grouse effort, as far as not all decisions, like you said, some are not set up for the adaptive nature of the decisions. You're going to make a decision, and you need that durability. It's going to have to stand, but there's others that are, and so we're looking at different programs, different decisions where adaptive management might be able to come to play. It's not going to necessarily be a one-size-fits-all, but we're trying to explore the process and how we would and where we would be able to implement it in our planning process. So,
in the far back, and then let's have hands. And two people here who have spoken before. Is there anybody else who has not spoken before that would like to get their hand up? Okay, there are two in the middle there, Claire, right there. And we'll have one more. Okay, go ahead, and then we'll have yours next. Okay.
Mike Paulus with WPX Energy. First, I wanted to thank BLM for holding this listening session, and Joe for taking all these questions on the spot. I reviewed the document that's kind of, I guess, an umbrella document to this Planning 2.0. It's talking about winning the challenges of the future. And in that document, it talks about some of the things that you need to take action on coming out with a outcome-based planning process. And one of those things was to conduct a comprehensive national review of litigation-related planning issues. And it should also say that the approaches that you're taking with your alternative planning should avoid future litigation. So I guess my question is, have you conducted that review, and is it available? And how do you see this planning approach helping you avoid future litigation?
well, since you all are going to help us develop it, we hope, it's going to, yeah, we did. That's the internal assessment we did. We did look at an internal assessment. And really, it was on for land use plan, records of decision. We looked at the litigation starting back around, early 2000s when we kind of embarked on this new phase of planning, and just, saw some of the areas where process-wise we failed, and looked at, whether it was FLTMA issues or NEPA issues, and Wilderness Act issues. I mean, there was a lot of just looking at those cases, trying to determine the extent of some of the decisions and how far-ranging they were or were not, whether it just specific to that specific plan, and not following through the proper procedures. And so we looked at that just to get a better handle of how we fared. And it is kind of that part of the document is kind of just an internal assessment that we did. We don't have it that it's available for the public at this time, but just as far as what it was, that's all it was. And just trying to take a look back and see, where we fell short, and in a few areas. And so through the recommendations that the team developed, they tried to build on some of those just to try to help us moving forward in the future. So
we're going to have time for 3 or 4 more questions. So first, I'm going to go to Leah, and you had something from the web, and then your turn.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mary Margaret. So this is a combination, in the interest of time, to answer DK, Joe, and Jill's questions. And they're wondering, as we ratchet up the planning to a higher level for landscape planning, and the difficulty that might come about with engaging with smaller local groups. Will the BLM be addressing how to engage some of these smaller local groups, be it conservation groups for wildlife, wild horses, or some of the small and dispersed native tribes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And like I think what you've heard, throughout today, we really value our partners at the local level, whether it's our local cooperators or local groups. We're looking for ways to enhance collaboration. And granted, when you take these plans and bring them to a higher level and bring more people in, some of the louder folks can, drown out some of the, not so loud. And so we are, but we're actively looking for ways to continue to engage these folks. And that's where even some of the more detailed planning that's going to be pulled out, it's like some of the travel management planning and some of the more, specific, a lot of those planning efforts, we really need some of the local expertise that a lot of these groups have, or local issues for those, but also for the plans. And so again, today, looking for some of your ideas on that enhancement of our collaborative process, and we want to make sure that those folks continue to have a seat at the table with us.
Okay, our friend right back here.
I'm Jim Spahar from Grand Junction. I'm a sportsman and a former local elected official, and I guess I have a practical question from an agency standpoint. And as some of these landscape level planning efforts necessarily transcend your own internal boundaries between field offices or district offices, how do you propose to have adjoining offices engaged together as, I guess, what amounts to a cooperating agency or something? And then at the other end of this, who's responsible for the implementation, and how does that work?
Yeah, good question. In some states already, where they're moving to more district plans, like Nevada, where you have multiple field office managers, multiple jurisdictions, counties working together under that district structure that BLM has. And so we have some examples where that's worked well, and then there's other areas, where there's two field offices that are trying to plan together, and that might not always work the best, just because of our culture. And so we want to build a process that allows for folks to easily do that more often, encourages them to do that, and we think we can build a process that allows that. And I didn't catch the
well,
second
at
part.
the other end, once there is a plan, who's got the responsibility and the authority for implementation?
Yeah, and that's where, again, enhancing the collaborative nature of this process. We want to bring folks along at the beginning and have them check, the alternatives outreach step that we mentioned as far as some of the things we're thinking about. We want to bring our partners along the process so that they have ownership in it, because when we get to the finish line, that implementation, we rely on folks in this room and some of our state and local partners to help implement, because we don't have the resources to do it. And so we want to make sure we get greater buy-in from our constituents out there, our partners, so that when we do get to implementation, we do have more partners at the table with us. So
I know there are two people that have something more to say. So three. So, yeah, one, and then next to you, two. You'll be two, and you'll be three. Okay.
Hi, my name is Katie Schroeder. I'm a lawyer here in Denver. I'm a little bit confused. I was just wondering if you could clarify what you mean when you're saying that the plans will be less prescriptive. Could you clarify what prescriptions will not be included in the plans, and where those decisions will be made? Could you provide some examples of what you mean by that?
sure. The one we've thrown out there already is the travel management route designations in the plans. Those are, more what we call implementations, jargony, but implementation level decisions. And again, these are just thoughts. We haven't sat down with our programs to really, kind of look at the decisions that they put in the plans right now across the board, and it varies throughout the agency, and try to get a handle on that. And we're looking for ideas. So we by no means have decided what is in and what is out, but the travel decisions, the route designations is an easy one to go to, because trying to designate, route by route system for thousands of acres of routes in a larger planning process requires more detailed analysis and more detailed effort, more detailed focused cooperation on the ground with folks and it adds a lot of time. And so that's one example where we point to where that would happen outside of the RMP process. But again, these are just our ideas. We have not made any, decisions. We're kind of at the beginning, and we just know that there's been so much put in here. We have to get cleared. We have to make it clear for our own folks, but clear for the public what decisions are in these plans, and so that there's consistency across boundaries and across states. So that's really what we're after.
Me? Okay. Okay. Since I only have one chance, I have a couple of things, and I'll just be really brief. One is that the process that you're talking about seems to be predicated upon placing a lot more burden on the public as far as involvement is concerned. And so I'm curious how you're going to ensure that you get the level of involvement that you want. With Montana, we had 6 plans come out in a couple of months. How in the world can you get involved in pre-planning and all this other stuff when you have so many coming out at the same time? That's one. And two, I'd like you to explain what your adaptive management policy is. Have you established a program on how you're going to implement that? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question on the getting folks involved. One thing we're hoping is if we have a more efficient process, folks are going to be able to see, engage from the beginning, and see the fruits of their labor more. We're not going to have plans taking 8 to 10 years to finish. And so, again, it is going to require the good faith effort of our partners to really, come and join us but not only just join us and provide us information, but see that their information, see that transparency, see how their information is, being used as we move forward. So, again, open to ideas. It is going to be we are asking for more, but that's what we've heard from the public when we've kind of gone around. We want to engage more. You guys engage us, and then you go away, and we don't see you for a couple years, and you come out, and we're like, what is this? And so we're trying to listen and provide some additional opportunities to try to get away from that. And then the second part of your question was the adaptive management. Okay. Yeah, the department has an adaptive management guidebook, I want to say, or policy. I'm not sure what it is. Matt, in the back there. Is it, what would you call it? Technical kind of guidebook on adaptive management. But in our last handbook that the BLM put out, we never had any formal adaptive management policy. And so that's what we envision developing as part of this process, and would ideally go in our handbook.
Okay, this is going to be our last question, and then I'm going to tell you what's happening next. Your turn.
Barbara Vasquez, thanks for letting me ask a second question. So a lot of us are here quite excited that you're looking for a more efficient, adaptive, landscape level planning process, but there are a lot of questions around the detail. Let me ask a specific question. So imagine you have a landscape level plan that has to do with oil and gas development. Will it include specifics like setbacks from surface water? How would you envision taking a specific like that and rippling it down into RMPs that come out at different times? Technology is changing in the oil and gas industry. How would you imagine being adaptive to those changes of technology with regard to protecting the surface water resource?
Good last question, eh?
We have to get into specifics, huh? No, it's a great question, and a lot of the Bureau's been going through leasing reform, and one of the areas, is trying to get greater consistency in some of the stipulations, which are a form of land use, in our land use plan decisions. And so, one of the things we're going to be looking for, and again, looking for feedback from you, is on some of those stipulations that go in the plan. We want to be able to bring that new information that comes in and make those changes to some of the decisions through the adaptive process. But we're trying to figure out a way to do that that would allow us to do that, because when we make those decisions in the plan, they are commitments that are there, that get attached in the form of the setbacks you referred to the leases that are offered. And so, again, we want to be mindful of how that process, and works, and where we do have some flexibility And we're seriously looking at ways to bring in new information through the adaptive process, and that's one area where we'll be looking, but we don't have necessarily the specifics of how that will work.
And the question, at what level are those specifics applied, at the lease or at the APD?
Yeah.
Can you use that as a tool for adaptive management to respond to new technology?
Yeah, and the good example is the habitat from as far as this critical winter range habitat shifts. Can you bring that easily into your stipulations that you have, through your planning process? And again, that's some of the details that we'll be working through, and open to ideas from you guys.
So that might be a really great segue into what is going to happen next, which is ideas that you can provide to BLM. So you might be interested in knowing that there are 100 people on the air that are listening. Hello to you all. And because we're going into small groups, you 100 people in the air may have trouble getting in. So our suggestion to you is that if you, first of all, be patient. There are going to be 2 small groups for people on the air, and you'll hear about that. And the second is you on the air might submit comments. So there are various ways for you to be heard. Is there anything more you want me to say to people on the air? Okay. So for people in the room, it is now, is it 2:30? Is my watch? Yeah. Okay. We're going to start another process here in about 10 minutes, and this is what it's going to look like. You notice there are tables that have blue whoosies on them. Come saw. There are 5 of them. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, basically in the corners. I'll move this one up. Each table should have about 13 people at it. Your job, 14 people, okay. Your job is to mix yourselves up so that you're sitting with people that you don't know and you don't work with, and that you make each table have 14 people in it in about 10 minutes. So that's sort of a challenging job, right? I know. And you're all going to go out and you're going to start talking with each other, and you're going to mill around, and we're going to have trouble getting started. So we'd really appreciate anybody who has anything they want to say to the Bureau of Land Management to be back here at 2:40. And then we will start, and the CDR people will be facilitating your small groups, and you'll be asked to comment on those 2 questions. Is there anything else I should tell people? Okay, so take a break, and then come back and put yourselves at one of these 5 tables. Thank you very much.